deaths of working age adults are up over 40% above expected values. Hey, Aaron, let's go to video clip 1. I just want to hear that intro real quick.
And we are seeing right now the highest death rates we have ever seen in the history of this business.
The highest death rates they have ever seen in the history of business. Scott Davidson, CEO of a life insurance company. What he's talking about there is that they've been in business since like 1896. So
I was about to ask, how long is that?
That would be through what we would call technically World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, a variety of high mortality events and things like that. And they're seeing death rates that are really inexplicable. So this is 18 to 64-year-olds. And this has just come up as a significant feature of 2021, and it's carrying here into early 2022 as well. So we're going to explore that a little bit. It's just data. I don't have any particular things I want to say about it. I've got some hints, but we're going to take a look at that. Let's go to that longer clip. And Aaron, I may ask you to stop it here and there, but this is, again, CEO of a major life insurance company. And these people got the goods, right? They have the data, right? They've got decades and decades of data. They track the statistics really, really carefully, right? They have a financial incentive in knowing how long people are going to live and when they die early. That's their incentive. As I've recently discovered, hospitals had a very strong incentive to classify people as having COVID, right? Because they got a 20% kicker if they put them on remdesivir. They got a 20% kicker if they had to go into up through the stage from into ICU. They got a $39,000 bonus if they had to put them on a vent. So, hey, Charlie Munger says, you show me the incentive, I will show you the outcome. Well, Scott Davidson and the life insurance companies, they have an incentive here to track what's going on with the people that they cover. Okay, longer clip. Let's take a listen.
And we are seeing right now the highest death rates we have ever seen in the history of this business, not just at One America. The data is consistent across every player in that business. Now, this is primarily working age people, 18 to 64, that are in employers like all the employers on the screen here. And what we saw just in third quarter, and we're seeing it continue into fourth quarter, is that death rates are up 40% over what they were pre-pandemic. Now, just to give you an idea of how bad that is, a 3 sigma or a 1 in 200 year catastrophe would be 10% increase over pre-pandemic. So 40% is just unheard of. And what the data is showing us is that the deaths that are being reported as COVID deaths greatly understate the actual death losses among working age people from the pandemic. It may not all be COVID on their death certificate, but deaths are up just a huge, huge numbers.
Whoa. All right, so let's decode that a little bit. There's a bunch to unpack in there. He said some really important things right at the end. He said, we can't ascribe all of this to COVID. So he's already admitting that. He goes on later to suggest that maybe this is because people were or under vaccinated. But it's just a theory. They didn't actually have any data for that. But what we do have is a 40% increase. And he said something, Aaron, let's bring the slides in because all right, well, here we are in daily costs. And what they say here is, you see, he says, just to give you an idea, quoting here, how bad that is, a 3 sigma or 200-year catastrophe would be a 10% increase over pre-pandemic levels. They saw a 40% increase. Okay. Hey, Aaron, I still need display on this monitor over here, if you could. So this is what we got to talk about this. Perfect. Thank you. That's awesome. So what does that mean? A 3 sigma event. So we're going to get
What does that mean, Dr. Martenson?
I told you there would be no math, and I lied. This is really cool. So this is where statistics comes to life. I think there's trust me, I'm going to land this bird on a branch.
You should see our dates. Date night is amazing with this man.
Oh yeah, I bring out my TI 85 calculator. It's amazing. So 3 sigma. So this is a normal bell curve of distribution. So if we were measuring, say, the height of people in Boston or San Francisco or any large place with a lot of people in it, million plus, you would find this sort of bell curve of heights, right? And so one standard deviation is a statistical measure that says within a normal distributed population, you would find roughly 2/3 of the data would fall within this. Let's say that's like for men, 5'3" to 5'10", something like that. That's where you'd find 2/3 of your data. But by the time you've gotten to 2 standard deviations, you are now covering 95.5% of the data. And by the time you get to 3 standard deviations, 3 sigma, a standard deviation is called a sigma. 3 sigma is covering 99.7% of the data. So you can see over here on the side, there's a little table that says, well, if this thing happened, we're looking for something approximate frequency for a daily event. If it had a 1 sigma event, you'd expect to see it twice a week. And if this daily event happened with 2 sigma frequency, you would see it every 3 weeks. If it was 3 sigma, you'd see it yearly. But by the time you got down to, say, 6 sigma, you should see this thing happening every 1.5 million years, right? So, so there's very, very little data out there. I'm raising all of this because it's been described that this 40% increase in deaths is a 10 sigma event. It's just a little bit unlikely, right? Just a little bit. I mean, we opened this up with the idea that Scott Davidson, the CEO of the life insurance company, is talking about 40% increase in excess deaths in working age people, 18 to 64. And we reviewed that data and saw that it's not just statistically unlikely. Like, a p-value of having a 0.05 means if it has a 1 in 20 chance of happening by accident, we say maybe that's statistically significant, right? 1 in 20 can still happen, right? Your D&D 20-sided die will sometimes roll the number you want, right? But so it's not that unlikely. But 40% increase should happen, according to my statistics, once every billion years or so on its own by accident, absent a war or some other causative explanatory factor. And we don't yet have the data to say, is it long COVID? Is it related to COVID? Or was it related to inappropriate lockdown procedures and other things? Are these all small business owners who were destroyed and, gave up the ghost because drank themselves to death or used fentanyl or something because they were otherwise dispirited to that extent? Or was it something else? And we should be examining that with all of our energy. And instead, we're just ghosting it, ignoring it, and taking it away, which makes me suspicious. But it's somebody's job to track this.
That's true.
So to the extent somebody's got a busy job and they're welding or teaching kids or doing whatever they're doing or trucking things across the country, that's fine. But the CDC has a $42 billion budget or whatever it is. It's like, I don't know what it's big number.
Yeah, no, I agree
right?
with you about
It's
that.
somebody's job to not track this, right? So at any rate, that's my expectation. But the fact that they aren't tells me lots. Let me put this in numbers. That is somewhere, depending on who's doing the statistics, how you look at it, somewhere between 170 and 270,000 excess deaths that weren't expected. The Vietnam War was 58,000 deaths. So what we're talking about here is anywhere from 3.5 to 5 or so Vietnam Wars of excess unexpected mortality in a certain age group of people, which shouldn't be happening. Full stop. So again, where's the curiosity? Where's the inquiry? Where's at least the explanatory function to come along and say, well, we added it up. It's this, and this. And then we can go, I'm not sure you got it right. Show us your data. That would be the process, but it's just sins of omission. This thing is just gone from the landscape at this point.
Yeah.
So it's weird, right? So that tells me something, and you can fill in the blanks for yourself, but it should be common. It should be common knowledge.
It should be.
It really should be.
It needs to be.
It deserves to be.
Right. And if there are people obviously that passed away whose lives, mean something as well, and why they passed away and of what or because of what, I think it's I don't know, as humans maybe, because I don't even want to break it down any further. As humans, I think if we're going to consider our own lives valuable, then I feel like we should be considering these things more seriously and caring about what the answers are to these questions.
Well, of course, we deserve answers, right? If my tax dollars go to support a multi-billion-dollar agency whose only job is to sift through this data, I kind of expect they're going to do that. It'd be like, what if we gave $40 billion a year to your local state road crew and nothing ever got done? Just potholes and bridges falling into rivers, right? And everybody just shrugs and says, well, January of 2020, there was a paper that came out by Prashad et al., some Indian researchers, and they noted that there were 4 separate regions on the spike protein where the peptides, the amino acids that made these peptide fragments, 4 of them, had 100% sequence homology with the HIV virus, specifically in the GP120 protein. Now, if you've been watching of late, you've probably heard Robert Malone has said people who've gotten the vaccine are in danger of falling into acquired immune deficiency syndrome. That's AIDS. Did I just say that we gave ourselves HIV? No. HIV is the virus that is thought to lead to a syndrome which is called acquired immune deficiency syndrome. That AIDS piece right there you can get from a variety of different causative agents, right? HIV is potentially one. Little disagreement now among some people about how that all comes about, but let's go back to the AIDS concept. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome means that you have a deficiency in your immune system, a deficiency. When you have a deficiency in your immune system, things that were formerly held in check aren't held in check anymore. So cancer. Everybody listening to this, we've all had cancer. Our bodies have recognized it. Not our bodies, our immune systems. Our immune systems, not having suffered from a deficiency, would recognize the cancer, said, this cell doesn't seem to be operating quite right, and takes it out of existence, or convinces the cell to go through cell-programmed death, apoptosis. At any rate, the cancer cell takes itself out or is taken out of the situation before it can create problems and grow out of control. If you have a deficient immune system, it's possible then for cancers to come forward and grow. If you had mono as a teenager, which I did, or any of these viruses that like chickenpox or cytomegalovirus or Epstein-Barr, any of these things, right, that if you have these viruses, you don't actually get rid of them. Your body fights them to a draw. They've inserted themselves into the DNA typically of your cells, and they're just hanging out. Nothing's happening because your body can recognize them whenever they emerge again, they get attacked. Problem is, when your immune system becomes deficient, when you have that acquired immune deficiency syndrome, if you get that and your immune system is no longer able to respond appropriately, then these underlying conditions come roaring back out of the gate. When we talked with Keith Berkowitz at our yearly seminar here back in January of this year of 2022, he said that roughly 50% of his practice was vaccine-injured people, 50% was long-haul COVID. Very similar syndromes. Now, why is that? Well, probably because they have the same etiology, the same underlying causative mechanism, which is that the spike protein actually causes the harm. It's not the full virus, it's the spike protein. The spike protein that we get from the vaccine is similar in many ways to the wild type virus spike protein, but dissimilar enough that I'm going to have to separate them because I think they may do a lot of similar things, but I don't know that overlap is 100% because they're not the same thing. The proteins, in order to have the spike protein to have exactly the same effect, would have to be in exactly the same conformation with exactly the same glycosylation and other sort of surface modifications on it. It has to look identical. Well, listen, when you put mRNA into somebody and they express this thing and it's full of pseudouridine instead of uridine, when it doesn't come out of the normal pathway of assembly that the wild type virus would come through, that spike protein is going to come out, but it's going to be a little mutated, right? And it's going to be a little awkward. So it possibly does a lot of the same things, but we have to hold open the idea that the spike protein that comes from the mRNA vaccines is a different beast from the one that comes from the wild type virus. But let's imagine they have a good amount of overlap, and so we can assign to them the same sorts of outcomes. It's entirely possible then that long COVID and vaccine injury are fairly synonymous in a lot of folks. What Keith told us was that every single person, whether they're vaccine injured or whether they're long haul COVID, When they come in, he runs a panel of tests on them. He's looking for things like cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr, things like that. He finds really high titers, that is quantities of those viruses in everybody who's showing up. Everybody, pretty much. Pretty much everybody. So that speaks strongly to this AIDS kind of hypothesis, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which means that somehow the spike protein, whether coming from virus or coming from the vaccine, is creating a condition where the immune system is suppressed. And because of that suppression, things formerly held in check like Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, they come roaring back out of the gate as well. This would be consistent with the things we saw in the DMED database, which was the release of data from the military database system, which is their equivalent of VAERS, but it's their data monitoring system for various conditions and general health and disease within their military population. So they saw their 300% increase in cancers. That, again, is an AIDS syndrome because your immune system is busy keeping those things in check. If your immune system gets knocked offline or is suppressed in some way, then you would expect those underlying conditions to come roaring out of the gate, including the underlying condition of having a normal emergence and occurrence of cancer as a normal prospect of being alive. It happens, your body recognizes it, takes it out. If it can't do that because the immune system is not functioning, then you would see these cancers emerge even in people for whom we wouldn't call them an underlying condition. These were cancers that should have been detected and taken out that weren't. So that's the hypothesis. Is this happening? Is there any data to suggest or support the idea that this lab-created SARS-CoV-2 virus, did it have anything in it that might suggest it could have some sort of HIV-like role in suppressing our immune system? All right. Now we got to go back over to HIV is this human virus, the human, immunosuppressive virus. This thing, maybe it came from the simian. There's a simian version, an ape version of the HIV. But anyway, it's the human immunodeficiency virus. This thing, where'd it come from? It's another story there. You might be surprised to find out or not. It has a number of proteins on its surface. One of the most important ones is called GP120. It's one of the proteins that mediates binding to the receptors that gets it into the white blood cells, that causes those white blood cells to be harmed by its taking up. So if you were one of these lab researchers and you're curious about how viruses get into cells and you don't like waiting for nature to be all slow about it and you want to speed up this process, you could do worse than to supercharge a spike protein with maybe some fragments from that GP120 protein. So that's what happened. Here we're seeing, back to that Prashad paper, they found those 4 sequences that had 100% homology, that means identity, with chunks from the GP120 protein from HIV. What a chance. But here's the thing. It's not just that these chunks, these are like little 6, 8, and slightly longer amino acid sequences. They're little chunks. It's not just that the spike protein had them somewhere. Where if you had a spike protein, which is like this big giant, like imagine a whole floral arrangement. You got this giant floral arrangement with little chrysanthemums on the outside. That's where you would want any of your binding protein or binding epitopes to be, because that's the part that's out there interacting with a receptor. Okay, so let's go there now. The inestimable Jicky leaks ran the models and found out where on the spike protein would those 4 HIV inserts from the Prashad paper, where would those show up? Well, unfortunately, they show up out here on these outside areas, right where you would want them to be. They're in the perfect spot. It's not like one of these 4 inserts was buried deep in this thing and one was accidentally on the outside, or all 4 were just buried in stupid spots where they couldn't do anything. Nope. All 4 of these HIV inserts were located in prime spots to facilitate the binding of the spike protein to, the receptors that we know the GP120 protein is targeted for. So Coincidence? Well, it's just another one of these coincidences. You know me, I'm a coincidence theorist. I hate coincidences. This is actually, statistically speaking, impossible that it had 4 similar inserts and that they showed up in these spots. It's impossible that it had the 4 inserts in the first place, statistically speaking. So this, again, very strong, compelling evidence to me that people were monkeying around in a lab trying to create various super viruses. The part where we want to get back to the RICO statutes on this whole thing is that not only did they do this, but they were ready with mRNA vaccines that they had been working on for years, just in case a virus like this came roaring out of the gate and got loose among the public. So that's part one. I'm very, very positive that a group of people created these viruses. I'm very, very positive that there is a medical system that was, and a pharma system that was ready to make beaucoup bucks off of the emergence of a virus like this in terms of treatments that don't work, like remdesivir and ventilating and all of that, to the vaccines that came roaring out of the gate, all that. So this is absolute racketeering that happened, and mass murder probably when you get right down to it. But are we facing a condition now where people who've had too much exposure to the spike protein, whose normal immune systems weren't able to clear the spike proteins out in a legitimate, timely fashion, are they facing AIDS? And the answer is quite possibly. And we would detect that in an explosion or an increase in a variety of conditions out there beyond the myocarditis, which we know is very real. But we would start to be seeing this in things like chronic fatigue, neurodegenerative or neurolassitude sort of disorders where people are just really run down, unable to cope. We would see this in things like where the body's attacking itself because it can't regulate appropriately. Tinnitus would fall into that. We would see it in, obviously, the emergence of cancers and then all these other viral outbreaks because your body is not appropriately managing itself. Instead of having a full-throated look into that, we were just treated to really crazy junk like this, which is so sad. I guess I just have to sort of laugh at it a little bit. But we found out on April 8th that Pfizer had to hire 600 employees early on when it was doing its vaccine safety monitoring because it saw, quote unquote, large increase in adverse event reports. They never reported those to us. The FDA never reported them. They had to hire 600 people just to begin cataloging the adverse events they were seeing early in the vaccine rollouts. Instead of following that up and giving us appropriate information, we're just told that now maybe we get heart attacks because we smoke weed or because the ref's whistles were too loud, or, oh, here's the Daily Mail helpfully telling us that beware of warm summer evenings. Men in their early 60s face greater risk of dying from heart attacks and strokes on muggy nights. Study claims. Well, we all know now that these studies are usually full of shit. And they just will tell you exactly what the researchers want them to say. We saw this recently with the ivermectin trials, the Mills studies. Mills out of McMaster University run down in Brazil. Complete crap. I'll go over those studies in more detail at some point. Alexandros Marianos is brilliantly torn through all of those, and there's just so much wrong with those studies. But still, it didn't matter. They won't be torn apart in the general scientific community because they tell the tale that they want them to tell, which is ivermectin doesn't work. We live in a captive system that is destroying health. And it's been doing it with our food. It's doing it with gaslighting by telling us that it's muggy nights that are our problems, that people have anxiety when actually they have myocarditis, telling us that we need 4th boosters, even though nobody can show how a 1st, 2nd, or 3rd shot does anything against the current variants that are circulating. No matter. We need 4th boosters. Hey, we need it in children right away. Hey, we need it in infants. Pay no attention to the fact that neither of those groups are at all at risk from COVID, statistically speaking, and pay no attention to the fact that once we get those vaccines on those childhood vaccine mandatory lists, that all liability is forever and permanently removed from the government and the companies in this regard. I mean, not the government, I guess, because you could always sue the Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund, but good luck, because you actually have to sue the Treasury Department, and it's a long process, and most people don't go down that path. So at any rate, that's where we are in the story.